let's get into the other hazards you will encounter while working on or near electricity. Arc flash and arc blast. What we're talking about here is a sudden release of energy caused by an electrical arc.
Do you know how long it takes for an arc flash event to happen? Less than 1/10 of a second. That means it's over before you even know what happened. Then the long road to recovery begins.
Arc events pack a lot of power and cause all kinds of injuries. The gas associated with an arcing event is poisonous. When inhaled, it can cause long-term or fatal damage to the lungs. Molten copper and steel is ejected as plasma and can embed in bone and teeth. Shrapnel, like doors or equipment covers, can be hurled through the air at 700 miles per hour. The sound can hit 140 decibels, similar to a jet engine, and only 40 decibels less than the loudest sound ever recorded. This can result in permanent deafness. The light can cause blindness. As the copper rapidly turns to vapor, it expands to 67,000 times its original volume. This creates a blast force strong enough to hurl a person across a room. And let's not forget the most well-known characteristic of an arc flash event, the heat. We're talking about temperatures of 35,000 degrees Fahrenheit.
Think about how much heat that really is. A standard conventional oven cooks at 300 to 500 degrees Fahrenheit. A jet engine's temp is about 2,000 degrees. Most welding takes place around 3,100 degrees Fahrenheit. That's the flame temp. The surface of the sun is 10,000 degrees Fahrenheit, meaning an arc flash event is 3 times as hot as the sun.
Anyone who survived an arc flash event will tell you how terrifying it is. We talked to Jason B. about how his arc flash experience changed his life forever.
My name is Jason Brosen, and this is my arc flash story. Yeah, I just started a day like any other day. You know, woke up, headed to work about 7 in the morning, just normal construction time. Got my assignment for the day. I was production manager there and took care of the little more risky stuff. And we needed to put a breaker in. So I got, you know, it was April 7th. It's a cool day. Just show up, and it was a hotel, you know, putting in a large frame, medium-sized frame breaker. You know, I had some loose parts. The bus bar was kind of loose. Was having trouble getting the breaker to fit and align itself. And in moving those bars, they got too close and it exploded. Big explosion. You know, the lights went out, the fire sirens were going off, or the fire alarm. And I wasn't sure if I was on fire. You know, I didn't know the extent of my damage. Hands or face, I knew I was burnt. I could feel the tightness. A hotel manager heard the explosion, drugged me out of the room basically, where I could assess the burns, and I could hear the fire trucks on their way. Fire station was real close. As I got outside, the firemen arrived and started, you know, doing their work on me, and I had no idea the extent. I thought I was going to be okay in just a month or so, or 2 months. I had no idea. I didn't know what was going on. I didn't know what my injuries would amount to. They rushed me to the hospital, where I spent 2 weeks in ICU and 7 months, you know, rehabbing to regain control, not to mention the damage that was caused physically, emotionally, mentally, you know, just the whole bit. So yeah, it was a pretty big accident. I wouldn't recommend it for anybody. been an electrician, a master electrician since '96. So I've been in the field, been in the construction industry for about 30 years. Became an electrician, was going to become an engineer, and decided to go into the electrical field because I was too stupid to do the calculus. So I ended up progressing through that. From the longest time, I put in my first car stereo when I was 12. I didn't know what I was doing. It was an old Volare station wagon, you know, ripping crap out. And so my dad is that way. And just from an early age, I would ask for electric or electronic toys just so I could take them apart, you know. As I progressed and started doing car stereo stuff, I really, I did a lot of high-end car stereo stuff. Ran install at Best Buy for a number of years, you know, car install. And then I've got several friends that are in the AV industry, worked with them, and then we started doing houses. And then that's when I got into the electrical technology program, which is really just getting an associate's degree and then taking a master's exam or a journeyman, so you're like an electrician at that point. I was able to bamboozle the city, you know, with enough experience that they allowed me to take it. Today, you would never be able to take it with that much experience. I never said I was a master electrician until 5 years later. And I'm like, yeah, okay, now I've got enough experience here, and I've had the test, and now I've got the experience. So anyway, got my master's in July of '96 is when I took that. And so from then, almost the day I passed that, I started working the commercial electrical. You know, I had a friend that worked for a company. He said, yeah, come on over. So got a job doing commercial, a lot of restaurant work, new construction. Went from there to a service company for 20 years where I worked on everything. Low voltage, high voltage, audio, video, scoreboards, you know, scoreboards in the stadiums, and just, I mean, you name it, troubleshooting gear, and, you know, just little to big. So probably, I think it was 2007, 2009. So I'd been in the field for quite a while. I was about a 10-year master electrician, working on some gear. You know, the 10-year mark is when you start feeling like you know everything. You know, it's the new guys in the field, they end up getting hurt because they don't know, and then it's the 10-year guys that get hurt because they do know, and they think they know everything. So, you know, it was just a day like any other day, man. You start out the day, you get your work assignment, you know, you you just kind of grow apathetic towards your day. You know, you're just like, you know, whatever. It's been doing this forever. I'm just gonna go stick a breaker in and go home and see my kids late. You know, it's just, you don't think about it, and you just don't put safety at the forefront most of the time. When you're a 10-year master electrician who thinks he knows everything, you just don't consider, you just don't consider what could happen. Yeah. You don't consider the repercussions of an accident. You just don't really think about it. You know, I was ended up working on a big piece of gear, 2500 amp. As a hotel, and we got dispatched to install a new circuit for some pool equipment, 200 amp breaker, and we had to fit it in a spot that was sized for a 200 amp breaker. But inside that space, there's a GE piece of equipment. They coat the bus bar in tape, you know, from the factory. So I spent a lot of time meticulously cutting that tape off while it was hot, with no gear on, because I'd done it before, successfully, and I got through that process. But I did call my boss and say, man, this is pretty precarious here. You know, we might want to shut it off, and he didn't encourage me to shut it off. So, you know, as a boss now, also working as a project manager now, I encourage my guys to shut it off. So fourth section, it's 208, which really kind of squashes the industry-wide misconception that you can't have an arc flash of any substantial value in 208. So this was not even in the main section, it was in a branch section, 2500 amp sections, you know, 2500 amp gear. Transformer was really close, 500 kVA transformer. But anyways, a 4-section piece of GE gear, pretty standard in the industry. Lots of people use that. So 2500 amp main plus a bunch of branch sections, 3 branch sections. I needed to install a 200 amp breaker in one spot. So on that specific spot, I just took the above, on it, and below pieces of dead front off instead of removing the whole dead front, because I thought that would be safer. I mean, it turns out it was a good decision. It probably saved my life. As you can see in the pictures, you know, a lot of the heat rolled up, and that acted as a shield. There's no doubt it would have, you know, burned my face off, you know, at that point. But yeah, I mean, it's just a standard thing that most guys do. They'll take a box out of a, you know, a breaker out of a box, you know, they'll inspect it and turn it on and off a couple times, and then they'll go, you know, fitting it in the gear, and they'll, you know, stick a nut driver and bolt the thing in. And they'll do it hot, and they do it every single day, and 99% of the time they're successful at it. And so, you know, one of my quotes in trainings I do is, I was just incredibly successful at making stupid decisions. So it's those decisions that it comes back around. It'll eventually come back around where you will make a mistake, the gear will make a mistake, some designer will make a mistake, you'll open a panel cover and a bolt will fall down from the top of the panel cover, something you had no control of. It will eventually come back and get you. There's no doubt. So I had an arc flash event, you know, where the bus bars were loose in there and trying to adjust them, and it blew up on me. So, you know, it did some catastrophic damage. Only 14% burn, which is substantially less than a lot of people get flashed. Thankfully, my coat and pants didn't catch on fire. I didn't have a stitch of PPE on. It was all polyester, nylon, you know, workwear. So thankfully, my clothes didn't catch on fire, because that would have been pretty rough. Probably wouldn't have survived. But interestingly, you know, as we were talking, the cycles, you know, when people get in an accident, it was interesting. While I was getting flashed, I could actually feel the cycles, you know, boom, boom, boom. You know, it was a little faster than that, but you could differentiate, you know, you could feel that. And it felt like I only got hit with probably 7 cycles, give or take, if I had to, you know, throw a number at it. So thankfully the transformer fuse blew, and that's probably what saved my life, among other things of, you know, not taking the dead front off. So the second the arc flash happened, I knew what was going on. Just because, I mean, it's, you know, like most electricians that have been in the field for a long time, have YouTubed arc flash, have seen all the nasty videos of all the arc flash events that they can possibly see, usually. Some guys can't do it, but, and I'd been deep in NFP70E, I understood it, you know, I knew better than doing what I was doing. But anyway, to get back to it, so I knew what was going on. The arc flash was happening, and I could feel it. And as soon as the noise stopped, because I can just, you know, describe it as just noise, because it's just, you know, just an explosion. It's going on. It's just a millisecond. But as I said before, you slow down. As soon as the noise stopped, all the lights were out, and the room is filled with smoke, and I couldn't see. The very first thought was, am I on fire? Because I'd seen so many different videos from different vendors, from, you know, arc flash clothing, you know, arc rated workwear, where they show this kind of workwear, and the mannequin's on fire head to toe. So that's the very first thought was, oh my God, am I on fire? So, you know, just started, you know, kind of the vertical drop and roll type thing. And then I saw a door, a light crack open, because somebody from the hotel management opened the door because they heard what was going on. The fire alarms are all going off. And once I saw that, I was able to exit the room and then kind of gather my thoughts and see and then, you know, look at hands, and there was a bathroom. I wanted to see what my face looked like, and I, you know, and so just kind of assessed the damage. I'm not a real panicky guy. I don't flip out with accidents and stuff. I'm sure there was a level of shock, of course. Honestly, I thought after the accident, I go, yeah, that's pretty bad. I was looking at my hands, but I thought couple months, you know, I never thought I'd need skin grafts and be in a coma and sick in ICU for 2 weeks and off work for 7 months. I never in a million years would have thought that. So that's what I thought. I went outside. It was a cool day. It was about 40 that day. It's one of the reasons I had a coat on. The thing with burns is the first and second degree burns hurt, and third degree burns don't. They burn your nerves, you know. And so my hands, there was parts of my hands that hurt. They were real tight because just the, you know, just burn, you know, just, you know, shrinks everything up. My face was real tight, and it was a little painful, but it was 40 out, so it was pretty cool, and so it felt, you know, okay. And then as you see on the video, man, I started making calls. I called my boss, you know, and said, you need to get out here now. I blew this up. It's really bad. I'm injured. You know, you gotta mobilize. Get somebody here. It's bad. And I'm sure there was a level of panic in my voice to him, because he recounts later that, you know, it was pretty panicked. Then trying to call my wife, you know, couldn't get a hold of her, or call her mom, say, look, I'm on my way to the hospital. I got burnt pretty bad. I'm going to KU Med. So then, you know, as you saw, the fire department worked on me there and carted me off, you know, to the hospital. I remember their concern was my breathing because of the, you know, as you know, I mean, it's so hot that one of the worst injuries, aside from the burn infections, is breathing in that hot gas. You can't heal from that. Your lungs are done. Once you burn them all out, it is done. So they were really concerned about that. Miraculously, I didn't have, you know, a lot of guys go, you know, when that happens, it's just a jumping into cold water, you know. That didn't happen with me, which is, you know, miraculous. I did have a cough. I mean, for weeks, you know, I did have a cough, and, you know, coughed up soot and just stuff, you know. So, you know, it wasn't permanent so much, but yeah, I did some damage. The ride over, no, I remember I'm trying to get my wedding ring off because you swell, you get burnt, you get injured, you just swell. And man, they went through 2 can opener cutters trying to cut my ring. He's a big old gold man, and I mean, luckily they had me doped up pretty good, but I just remember that wasn't real comfortable. And I remember them cutting my pants off. They gave me some Daisy Dukes, man. They cut my pants all the way up to here, and that was a little awkward. Awkward.
You don't wear those anymore.
Yeah. So yeah, you know, it really hadn't set in. I didn't understand the extent of my injuries. Yeah. So the hospital. Really, the last thing I remember at the hospital was triage. Was them just cutting clothes off, you know, getting IVs set, cutting that ring off, and then it's gone. That's it. They put me out. They, you know, gave me something. I was out, and then that's when they debreed you, and you always hear the stories where oh, you're wide awake and they're scrubbing you. That wasn't my experience. They put me out. My expectations is they would put anybody out, but I've heard stories where they don't. So they debreed, which means they wire brush and, you know, scratch all the dead skin that they can get off, you know, face, they shave your head, you know, any facial hair. You can't have facial hair of any sort when you're burned. They will come in and they dry shave you every day. They'll come in and take the hair right off. There's something to do with the infection, creates infection, but went through the debreeding process, and this is based on pictures and recounts from my family. They put me in a room. They put me in a coma for 2, 3, 4 days. Yeah, I don't, something like that. I do remember coming to. It was probably 2, 3 days, somewhere at the end of that period, and the stories that you won't hear from most arc flash guys are like the PTSD stories, or the I'm in a hospital bed and it's a nurse change and there's nobody around and I've got 105-degree temp and I'm about to crap on myself and there's nobody around to help me. And you're just like, hey, there's no button, and you're like, hey, you know, and you crap on yourself. Those are the stories you don't hear about when guys lay in hospital beds. It's the stories, you know, where, you know, you can't work in that field anymore. It's those kind of things. And we can talk about that later. But anyway, so yeah, I remember kind of coming to, had a bad fever. Infection is almost 100% guaranteed with burns because it's just an open organ, essentially. It's open sores. So you catch stuff, especially guys that jump into ponds or stop, drop, and roll in the dirt, you know, or whatever. But so that hospital stay was largely just me being high on, you know, painkillers and getting a feeding tube, you know, that you can't, they don't want you eating, so they just feeding tube you, and IV your liquids, and you've got a tube stuck in your, you know what, and you're peeing in a bag, and it's pretty uncomfortable. And after a couple of weeks, you know, you're ready. They got me into, I'm going to say I had surgery, I think, on the 4th or 5th day, because they go in and the skin starts dying, so they have to go pretty quickly and make that skin fresh, cut it off your legs, and stick that new one on there and staple it on. Then they put you in it. They were trying some new things. Put my hands in bandages like this so that it would stretch. And so you're in there for days like that. But on probably day 6, they unbandaged me, and I've got pictures of that. You know that was the day they unbandaged me. And almost immediately they start getting you into therapy and also trimming excess skin that's not sticking. So every day you're in there, they're snipping pieces of skin off that are tags that are hanging up that aren't attaching, or they didn't attach, it's still raw too. So every day it was that. And then, you know, I could move my hands like this, you know, when I first got, you know, even after having this, they just open and I couldn't bend. So real swollen, you know, that kind of stuff. So recovery in the hospital was, you know, slight, because the real work is for months after that. You know, one thing I can tell you too is they use a yellow Vaseline covered kind of a canvas Bacter band, I think maybe is the name of it, but it's just a kind of a medicated or a sterile yellow thin canvas type cloth covered with Vaseline, and they cover your burns and injuries like with that stuff. Well, unfortunately, my skin grew into it as they had that on there. So part of my worst memories in there is this sitting under a sink and having to tear this off of a burnt hand. It was stuck in my skin. It had healed in there already, and I was just, oh my God. It's one of the worst, it's probably my worst memory in there, is dealing with that. So another thing, that's probably my most vivid memory of being in the hospital. Secondly is having to have nurses come in and wipe your butt. Your hands you can't even take care of yourself. You're in there, you can't take a leak on your own. You know, when they finally did pull a catheter out, which again is another memorable moment, that's brutal. That is brutal. So, you know, there was just, you know, starting from the hospital out, you know, there was trying to button shirts and put pants on, and you can't drive, and you're stuck at home, and, you know, you're pretty much a burden. And again, this is just 14%, man. This is hands and face. This isn't arms, this isn't legs. I mean, my legs hurt, you know, from the graft site. That was super painful, but not permanent, but super painful. Like I can't even, it was worse on my hands, just the graft sites. So it's 14%. You know, I got a fat head, so I'm not sure how much of it was here opposed to here, but you know, it stops at the wrist right here on each side, just past my watch. And then face. Now face, I didn't get It largely was not third degree. It was largely just a deep second, and with little spots, of stuff, where my hands were totally smoked. I mean, second degree burns on my palms, and then third on the back, to where it required skin grafts throughout my entire back of my hands. It's pretty intense.
Yeah.
Wouldn't recommend it. There's so many facets to an accident. Of course, everyone knows the OSHA facet, where they'll come in and they're going to beat you up. They're going to find everything they can find, and then they're going to go to your office, and then they're going to check out your fire extinguishers, and they're going to check out your smoke detectors, and they're going to see if your file cabinet drawers are open, and they're going to check your paperwork. So there's the OSHA aspect, and then there's the damaged gear aspect, and whether or not you can place that back in service. And really, the only people on a large piece of equipment that can deem that large piece of equipment serviceable is the factory. So because there was an injury involved, unlike you blow up a panel, you're just going to change the panel guts. But a big 4-section, 5-section piece of gear that's filled with carbon in copper and just, is damaged, and the middle section's damaged, in a room that you can't separate the sections, you have to get the factory involved. The attorneys get involved. There's that facet of it where now it becomes there's a claim, liability, there's insurance companies. So GE flew technicians out and determined that the gear was never installed properly. Section 1, 2, 3, 4 was really installed 1, 3, 2, 4 or something in that order. And because of that, barriers weren't in the right place. And then the original installing contractor did not put enough feeder conduit pipes in for the conduits to feed the gear. So they had to add a seventh set of conductors to get into the gear. And they ran those through the gear all the way down to the main section. So they ran in the building, unfused, all the way through the gear, and then into the main section, which was on the left. So in order to do that, they had to break out a lot of barriers. Now, none of that mattered in my accident because it didn't embolize into, it didn't explode into the other cabinets. So the arc flash was pretty much contained to the one spot I was working on. But it did open a huge can of worms for, the company that I work for, just in that whole work comp, insurance, and then it opened a big can of worms to the original installer because that equipment was wrong, and then a huge can of worms for the hotel owner, whose power was shut off, turned back on, and then shut off again because somebody decided they could turn it on without checking anything, without megging and doing all the proper safety, at least some pre-safety checks before temping it back on. Man, my new guys, I am safety hardcore with them, but you just got to beat safety into people's heads now. You really do, because people are stubborn anyway, and people are proud, and I already know all that. It's the new guys that don't know anything that get hurt. It's the old guys, the 10-year guys. The really old guys, they're pretty safe because they've been around a long time. So now I'm an old guy. So I passed the mid guy to the old guy. So now I'm an old guy. So, I went right back to doing what I was doing. It didn't scare me out of the field. Some guys aren't that lucky. They can lose, lose a lot. Some of the things I tell people is, you don't expect the, getting your butt wiped by nurses, or helping people dress you, but like me, I had a wife and 2 kids, still do. When you lose the ability to support your family as a man, and speaking as a man, that's a killer, man. It is not just a physical injury. It is a mental and emotional injury as much as anything. So you can carry PTSD, with you from explosion injuries. But man, if you can't go back to work and you're sitting around, depression is a major deal when you are injured and you can't go back to work. I think Previous editions of the 70E have been just rocket science. It's been very hard to understand. I think they're getting a lot better with charts, and there's different resources out there that as an electrician, if you care about safety, you can find resources that will help explain. You know what I mean? So you can find resources that will show you, distances that you need to be, the type of PPE you should be wearing. The biggest thing, as you know, with doing studies, is you don't know unless you have a study. You can make some assumptions based on the 70E, but unless you know what available fault current and stuff like that is from utilities and distances and all that stuff, you're just really, this is just a baseline guideline. Probably 10 years after I got burned, we were doing a disconnect downtown Kansas City. And the way they do downtown Kansas City, there's a big primary loop around downtown, and they have a transformer ring. And it's 200,000 available fault current at the building. So there is no PPE that'll protect you from a 200,000 available arc fault current. And it will not protect you. You had a 40 cal suit. You had to burn a hole. I just got to burn a hole in it. And so we had a disconnect that was falling off the wall, rusted out, right on the inside of the building, hooked to this transformer that was just feet away. And you just have to know that there are some dangerous situations out there that you need to ask questions, because there could be some do-it-yourself electrician guy who opens that thing, and that kills him immediately. Even with you put on a moon suit, it could kill him with a 200,000 available fault current. I mean, I don't know what the cals is on that, but it's going to be more than a 40 cal suit. So you can use the NFP 70. I think it's a fantastic document. They only care about safety. You know what I mean? There's no ulterior motive here. It's just about safety. So, I mean, if you're in a company or you're in charge of your people, you need to understand some stuff about that. You need to get training, from you guys, from reputable companies. You need to have some sort of arc flash training. You need to get studies done. If you're a plant engineer, you need to get arc fault studies done on your plant. And if you make changes, then those have to get amended. You add a 500 horsepower motor, you need to get that amended. There's so much in that book that most people just don't even know. When I was getting worked on site, I saw the fire department there with their camera. And later, when I got out of the hospital, I called their media director and I said, "Hey man, I was in an accident, a number of weeks back, and I noticed you were filming. Is there any way I can get a copy of that?" And the guy was like, "Yes." He's like, "I can't believe you're out of the hospital. You're doing all right." He's like, "Man, we see so many people that don't, and they're not doing what like you're doing. They're still in the hospital. They're permanent." And he's like, "Can I come over and do a follow-up interview?" And I was like, "Yeah, absolutely," because I'll bring a copy of the files. Yeah. And so I was able. I had my son. He was like 3 or something. I had my son. I was able to do a follow-up and thank the fire department. I just appreciated them quite a bit. Paramedics and fire department, they're just jam up. They moved efficiently. So I had mentioned it was a cold day out there. So being a portly man, I don't get cold very easily. So I left my coat on, and I was wearing this coat, and really it's the only thing that kept me from getting burned, all the way up to my shoulder. And you can see how much of my upper torso, if I hadn't been wearing that coat, it would have burned and left some pretty substantial burns, probably more in the 20 to 30% range. They told me at the hospital that if you're burned 40, 50%, your chances of surviving go way down. It's substantially down. So because of the infection, and the guy that was in the room next to me, he had substantial burns, and they were using pig cadavers, for his skin, because they had pulled all they could off his back, off his butt, off his legs, and they, at some point, you run out of skin to take. What was stuck on my sleeve of this coat was my watch. So my watch, one thing, people don't understand is that these things, these arc flashes are so hot, hotter than the surface of the sun, as you know, instantly in a tenth of a second. So it's hot and then it cools off immediately. Most people think that, you got to heat something up for a minute. This is just an instant arc flash, and it's completely melted the face of my watch. And so much so that there's melted copper stuck to the back of the stainless that you can't scratch off. So I can't imagine the heat to melt copper, send it under your watch in an explosion, and braze itself to something that's not even hot. Because usually, you've got to get something hot enough for it to stick. So there was enough heat generated by that to melt that watch. And so I take that around and show people because it's amazing the amount of heat it generates instantly. You can't get away from an arc flash. It's too fast. It's instant. You get burned, you're done. Yeah, it's an instant thing. It's an instant mistake that you can't change. So I'm Jason Brosen. Got arc flashed over 10 years ago. And the one point I'd tell you is to don't be me. Plan your work your plan, follow through with that plan. Do not make exceptions on anything when it comes to safety, period.
So what are the factors that affect how badly you can get injured in an arc flash event? Size of the explosion, proximity to the event, time exposed to the hazard, and the PPE you're wearing.
Let's start with the size of the explosion. From a raw calculation standpoint, the heat of an arc flash is a function of the amount of current over time. What this means is the heat from an arc flash event is determined by your available fault current and how long the arc is allowed to propagate.
Incident energy calculation yields a value on your equipment in calories per centimeter squared. This is a robust calculation based on the strength of your utility, impedance of upstream components, and how fast the protective devices interrupt the fault. Downstream regenerative items like large motors can also contribute to the event too. So that means if you abruptly remove power, the motor continues to spin, turning it into a generator for a short amount of time.
There are some ways we can control arc flash explosions with engineering and design. Arc flash mitigation reduces hazards and risks by modifying protective devices and electrical infrastructure. You can find out more in the inherent control section of the hierarchy of risk controls.
Before you attempt any modifications to upstream protective devices, make sure to get engineering approval because it all plays a role in arc flash calculations. If you turn up breaker settings to troubleshoot or replace a fuse with a larger or different type of fuse, you can cause unexpected downstream hazards.
Our next factor is proximity to the event. Where you are and when the arc flash explosion happens will directly impact the injuries you suffer. Pay attention to arc flash labeling and arc flash boundary. This is the distance where an arc flash event becomes hazardous. If you're not qualified or not needed to complete the task, you should remove yourself from the boundary.
Sometimes we see a person who's properly suited up in an arc flash suit performing work with someone standing next to them holding a flashlight who isn't wearing proper PPE. This is extremely dangerous. A method of safe illumination should be determined as part of planning before the job.
And be aware, if your arc flash boundary is greater than the limited approach boundary, make sure you've set up the barricades at the greater of the two distances. Sometimes qualified workers forget to properly barricade areas where electrical hazards exist. If you're an unqualified worker and see someone wearing arc flash PPE working on a piece of equipment, do not approach them or the area in which they're working. And if you're trying to get their attention, remember, they're required to wear earplugs under their arc flash PPE.
Bottom line, unless there's a safety emergency, wait for the qualified worker to finish the task remove themselves from the hazardous area, and remove their PPE.
Now, let's talk about how you'll be affected by the time exposed to an arc flash event. Remember, we're talking about severity that ramps up in milliseconds here. Your reflex time cannot protect you from an injury. And after only 2 seconds of exposure, an arc force blast can knock a person unconscious, leaving them stranded within the boundary.
What's important to realize is that outside of inherent controls deployed by an engineering or maintenance manager, there's really no way a victim can effectively shorten the duration of an arc flash event.
Let's move on to our final factor, arc flash PPE. Even though PPE is the last protective measure in the hierarchy of risk control methods, it's crucial for surviving an incident. If you're working inside the arc flash boundary, you must wear PPE. Remember, PPE is specifically designed and tested to help protect you from those 35,000 degree arc flash temps we talked about earlier. Donning the proper PPE could mean the difference between going home with a story or rushing to the ER with burns.
Now let's look at the safety ranges and categories of PPE. To do that, we're going to look at the incident energy method versus the arc flash category method. Let's look at it in terms of heat energy. A calorie is the amount of heat energy needed to raise the temperature of 1 gram of water by 1 degree Celsius. Note that this is the amount impressed on each square centimeter, making it exponentially larger than if it were just heating a single gram of water.
Let's start at 40 plus, meaning 40 calories per centimeter squared. A real arc flash nerd would get all riled up if you tell him this is a dangerous category and no safe PPE exists. But let's take a step back for some clarity. Check back to the 2015 version of the NFPA 70E, note 130.7a reads, when incident energy exceeds 40 calories per centimeter squared at a working distance, greater emphasis may be necessary with respect to de-energizing when exposed to electrical hazards. Based on these calculations and some popular software, the industry's response was to label this as dangerous, meaning no safe PPE exists. Did you know some locations within a facility are more dangerous for arc flash than others?
One of the most dangerous spots is the load side of the utility transformer and main switchgear. In this area, the fault current is generally very high, and the protective devices on the line side of the transformer are usually designed to protect the transformer itself, instead of the workers on the load side.
Sadly, arc flash events put U.S. workers in the hospital every day. Chances of survival are calculated by different methods, like the box score or abbreviated burn severity index. The quickest equation for an initial assessment is to take the victim's age plus the percent of body surface area burned to calculate the likelihood of a fatality. So, for example, if you're 40 years old and 30% of your body is burned, you have a 70% likelihood of fatality.
So what are the factors that influence the likelihood of an arc flash event? It could be anything from tasks to equipment to the work environment.
First, let's look at examples of tasks that might increase the chances of an arc flash event. Electrical testing, equipment maintenance, applying grounds, installation, removal, or racking of equipment, operation of outdoor medium voltage switches, operation of circuit breaker or switch the first time after maintenance, opening and closing panel covers, touching or manipulating insulated cable, interaction with series connected batteries, interacting with or working exposed to control voltages, and other abnormal equipment conditions.
Beyond tasks, arc flash hazards could happen because of equipment condition, maintenance, and environmental factors. Planned outages and maintenance should be performed per manufacturer specs. You can also find more information from the NFPA 70B as in Bravo or the International Electrical Testing Association.
There are a lot of companies that perform maintenance for industrial equipment. And, as the old saying goes, if If you don't schedule a planned outage for maintenance, your equipment will create an unplanned outage of its own. If you're smart about planned outages, you can find effective ways to plan for your production needs. If your plant creates a large volume of dust and debris, you might need to increase the interval of equipment cleaning to maintain safety and operation.
Now, what's the #1 factor that increases the likelihood of an arc flash event? You got it, the presence of power. So always aim to create an electrically safe work condition whenever possible. If you need to work energized, insulated tools are a must, and wearing PPE could be the difference between life and death.
That wraps up our section on arc flash event hazards. As we make our way through the rest of this course, remember, the hazards we're trying to prevent, avoid, or contain are very real and extremely dangerous.
Great job staying with us. If you are a safety manager, engineering, maintenance manager, or qualified worker, your next section will address the control methods of these hazards. If you are taking the unqualified worker course, we will see you in the hazard avoidance section.